great to see some of you folks that we know on our list of names and others who we look forward to getting to know you too. We want to welcome you as Rob and I sit in our office here in sunny Sioux Falls, South Dakota, with a very cool 0 degrees outside, but we're anticipating a great warm-up of about 32 degrees over the weekend, or 0 Celsius for you Canadians. So we're anticipating having a good time together here in the next 30 minutes or so. I'm Randy Reese, President and founder of Vantage Point 3, and just to give you a little bit of information, background information as to who I am. Originally from Saskatchewan in Canada, and moved to Sioux Falls in 1986. Married to Susan, have one son, Liam, and have been with Vantage Point 3 for about the past 10 to 12 years. Before that, did some teaching at Sioux Falls Seminary and along the way at Fuller Seminary, and also involved in some church planting endeavors here in the Sioux Falls area. I want to turn it over to my good friend Rob Lone and have him introduce himself.
Good to be with you today. I've been working here with Vantage Point 3 since 2004 in the whole area of educational design, developing our processes and curriculum, etc. A little bit of background on myself. Grew up in Philadelphia, Plymouth Brethren background, so all the things that kind of come with that as well. Formatively, adult years, spent a fair amount of time at Biola University in Southern California, first for seminary and then working there as a resident director and then teaching theology, spiritual formation before coming on board with Vantage Point 3 and Randy and helping deepen people's conversations through a process. And I've been doing that now and living in Sioux Falls, nowhere near an ocean, for the past 4 or 5 years. So, yeah, that's a little context for me.
Well, let me give you a bit of a sense of who Vantage Point 3 is and what we care about. We are committed to fostering depth and igniting faithful service by providing churches transformative processes that help people discover in a deeper way who God is, who they are, and what God desires to do through them. So if you're wondering what the 3 is about, those 3 italicized statements at the end give you a clue as to where at Vantage Point 3, what that 3 is about. We find ourselves caring about the deepening and empowering of adult believers and connecting that to the whole notion of leadership development as well. Part of that originally was ignited, if you will. In 1999, Rob and I had a chance to attend a conference in England where the question was asked, what's the health of the church globally? And in particular, those churches that would consider themselves evangelically connected. And there was a sense, and it came out in a quote by John Stott, who quoted his good buddy J.I. Packer, who said, the church seems to be suffering from 1,000 miles wide and a half-inch deep sort of syndrome. And we felt at that time that there was a marching order that we received at that conference to do something about that as much as we were able, and to do so in a way where we would connect our discipleship or our followership with the notion of leadership. And in part, that's what we're here to lean into today. A concern that we certainly have is how can we intentionally support and challenge adult believers to grow up into Christ. And we can discuss all of the nice leadership things we want, but unless we're paying attention to how are we deepening and empowering people in their followership, we're going to miss something significant. So in particular, we want to try to think of that through the use of a life story approach. When I was studying at Fuller Seminary under J. Robert Clinton, he made this statement: we don't just need more leaders who need to invest in people in such a way that helps them grow, or it helps them grow toward maturity over the long haul. So in other words, we need to somehow find ways to keep investing in people so that they grow up into maturity in Christ. And in the past 25 years in particular, there's been a whole lot out there, at least in the leadership development realm, that spoke a lot about leadership, but not a whole lot about followership. And in the past 2 to 5 years, there's been more noticing we've dropped something along the way. And what we really feel ourselves drawn toward is that we want to return to an approach that's been there all along, and it's not that complicated, but it confronts how we typically go about doing what we do in the discipleship of others.
That same sort of question of growing up has been echoing all through different parts of our church cultures. More recently, I was reading from Alan Roxborough, who's really a voice for missional formation, particularly in North America, but all over the world. And he talks about a conversation he had with a pastor. And in that conversation, the gentleman was inquiring why in the world you should care about what Alan was talking about. And what Alan had said to him is, if we don't ask these fundamental questions in the next 5 years, we'll just end up doing the same thing over and over again. And one of those fundamental questions was this. He said, we have to address the question of how to form men and women who will live a committed Christian life now, next year, next month, and for the rest of their lives. So in addition to many other different leadership voices, this voice of we must grow up is echoing throughout. And I think the echo goes back a little bit longer than 20 or 30 years in the Ephesians 4 passage. And so even giving you a context to our question of why to intentionally support and challenge adult believers to grow up into Christ, we feel very much in the echo of Paul's words that in Ephesians, we must no longer be children, but speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him as the head. And so there just seems to be a sense that we've been skimming across the surface in so many ways. And so these different voices are pointing that way. So that kind of introduces a bit of where we're coming from as we talk. Randy, you were just talking about this. Why don't you take this one?
Well, Rob, I was recently at a church and was invited to come and listen to their leadership team, which was kind of an adult discipleship team, and they were trying to get at how do we ignite more people in our church to get involved. And it's a conversation I know many of you have had, and it's one that you can put XYZ church name to it, but it's a similar conversation I've certainly bumped into over the past dozen years or so. So at First Church, we were entering this conversation, and I could just see the people's frustration trying to find out why aren't more people getting involved and how do we do that. And I tossed them the question, how are you folks investing in the formation of your adult believers rather than only trying to get them enlisted in the work that you're wanting them to do? And it was a question that certainly shifted the trajectory of our conversation. And it's a similar conversation and turn, so to speak, that concerns us here today. How is it that we can move toward a more investing way of our people? And we find one of the more effective ways of doing that is through a storied approach. We thought it might be good to enter a bit of a hearing from you in terms of a poll question that we want to show you. And it's a question to try to see what you think about your investment of your people. So you can see the question before you.
What is your top challenge to the investment of your adult believers?
So if you want to take a few seconds just to respond, either with those responses there, too busy to develop others, there's a lack of know-how or a process that helps you know how to do that. The adult believers in your setting might be resistant to wanting to grow for some reason. Or in your setting, the leadership is afraid to take your eye off the ball, so to speak, or that's what you hear from them when you're trying to move this direction. So we'll just give you a couple more seconds to complete, and we see that our results are coming in, which is kind of interesting, Rob.
And we recognize, obviously, all four of these are at different levels. You can see them reflected in different conversations. And I'm going to give it another second or two, and I'll close the poll.
Certainly the one that seems to be rising above the others is adult believers are resistant. I know as we try to invite.
So here are the results.
Here's the results. So by far, it's that third one. Adult believers are resistant, and I know in our setting, as we try to invite churches to consider how are they investing in their people, the reason that soars far above the others is people are too busy. Their lives are full at home, at church, and the workplace, and so the thought of them wanting to commit to something, it just simply is beyond what they can comprehend. And that's a significant struggle, and we found that as we invite people to take a pause and look at some things in themselves, it has a way of turning that.
And let us unpack structurally kind of the rest of what we want to do over the next few minutes here is with three things, this life story approach. And it really speaks to some of this resistance is how is it that we're going to begin with the learner? So there's three elements we want to hit on: honoring a biblical assumption, some of the research, both from our experience with walking through some 7,000 people walking through one of our central processes, 8 months, discovering along the way, and then application that's beyond, is almost an integration. Let me jump into this honoring a biblical assumption first, just to show our hand. The assumption that is kind of guiding what we're wanting to unpack with people is this: God is already up to something good in this world, in our communities, and in our unique lives. God is already up to something good. The burden is not for us to do a dance and bear act or figure out all the exact techniques we need and then get God to do something good. But the burden first is paying attention to that good thing he's up to in the world, in our communities, and in our unique lives. And one of the things that we've just discovered, that this exercise of paying attention, there needs to be some guidance in that, how we learn to pay attention. And in that, one of our processes as we go through, we really look like at a quarter of the process. One of the stages is really looking at this assumption through the lens of our own life story, paying attention to that good thing God's up to, almost using our own lives as a case study. And so it's this biblical assumption that even as we head into the research, undergirds, weaves its way through some of the reasons why beginning or approaching people's life stories can be such a transforming way of guiding them.
We want to give you a sense of what's backing up from a research perspective what we're wanting to lean into here today. And it comes from three primary places. One is leaning on the research of a narrative approach that J. Robert Clinton used as he studied leaders' lives over the years, and in particular with a focus on leadership development. We've had some 7,000 plus people go through one or more of our processes that really uses significantly a narrative approach, plus some 300 plus facilitators, but then also looking at the literature of how adults seem to learn best. And there's some significant things that we've noticed along the way. And the first one that we want to share with you, which...
Randy, can I just make a comment first? We will have a Q&A time in which you'll be able to submit some questions, just to let you know for those of you who are out there that I got a question or two about that. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Randy.
So the first point we want to share with you in terms of what we've noticed and what we certainly suggest for you to give some thought to is the first one that you see. A life story framework serves to invite the adult learner into a learning process. There's something about when a teacher invites us to think about something, but they invite us to connect it to our story in a very real, live sort of way, that it can have a way of igniting the learning. So I think of one person that I've encountered named Greg, who in his mid to late 40s hadn't really given much thought to his growth, although he had been a part of several church sorts of things and educational opportunities. But in terms of a transformative thing happening in his life, had been on pause for some time. And the last time that he'd really given his life some serious thought when he was 18 or 19, when he was looking for love in all the wrong places, so to speak. Or another person who considered himself a pew sitter for about 45 years, who was in his mid-60s, had won all the Bible memorization trophies, and yet it wasn't until he began to ask questions of his life that a different sort of connection and learning took place. So if we desire to change people's lives in a deep sort of way, the use of an informal approach like a narrative approach, the researchers tell us, seems to have a greater likelihood for fostering significant life change.
Yeah, for so many folks, we can live so unreflectively, just kind of hoping to get by with what we've already learned, and there's a much-needed kind of insertion of a learning process to kind of wake us up along the way.
A book that came out a few years back named Crucibles of Leadership by Robert Thomas, it was an interesting study that he wanted to try to find out what is it that causes people to learn significantly, and what precipitated that. And he found out that it was more through the hard turns of their personal life stories that people learned their most significant lessons. And as a result of that, it had quite a significant implication for how they led, where they led. But the other interesting thing to note from Thomas is that in giving reflection or inviting people to pause, to look at those hard turns, not only did they learn some significant things from that hard turn, but they also learned how they learned more effectively. And I hope you hear the distinction there. There was an invitation from looking at their life that maybe they can learn through some significant ways. And one of the more significant ways was to look at the hard turns of their lives.
Second element that's reflected, it kind of builds on this, is a life story framework serves to foster connectivity for the adult learner. There seems to be a cry for so many folks is what can help me help make sense of my life. I mean, we are experiencing a fair amount of just culturally change, discontinuity. Our lives often are more characterized by being fragmented than being whole. And so a place where a life story approach is a way in which we can begin with the assumption of God's already up to something good to connect the dots of our lives and look at our lives a little more holistically. One way of looking at just kind of the confusion here is, let me walk into this. We talked about this in the summary of what we're wanting to do is we've just reflected upon two messages that our culture tosses our way that we see that can be very confusing to the adult believer, adult learner. One is my story doesn't really matter. And these two could be a 16-week class. We'll stick with 5 minutes here. But my story doesn't really matter all that much. The shift of culture from being more of a local culture over the past 100 years to being more of a mass culture has really led us to the experience of being a stranger. Being anonymous is the normal sort of experience that we have in an awful lot of our relationships. Also, there's just, my story doesn't really matter. Just for, we listen to an awful lot of people's stories, and one of the themes that just jumps off the page is unnoticedness, how much they haven't been noticed. Now, so we see that in all sorts of places. Where the confusion is at is when you add the second message. The second message that is also there is my story is all that matters. I am the star of my own soap opera. Our vision of what reality is about has really been shrunk in our culture in particular. And there's all sorts of directions you can go philosophically or culturally, but I don't think you have to, we'll go into all that. I think just to recognize that people are carrying around with them some real confusion. So not only is my story doesn't really matter, but my story is all that matters. And so take, for example, listening to somebody, and very quickly you begin to listen to them, and you're first, I'm thinking of a guy from a few years ago, Steve, and all over his life, it just seemed like he was so absorbed, self-absorbed. And so he was getting an awful lot of Matthew 16. Take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. And it was creating more confusion because for Steve, as he heard that, this invitation to self-denial and self-sacrifice is so much a part of the kind of gospel living, how he was hearing that is it was an affirmation that his story doesn't really matter. By the same token, as one could talk with him about Psalm 139, you have been valued on God's mind for all time, even before you were born, this sort of uplifting sense of our dignity as people. And as you tell that story, the confusion then would become, oh, my story is all that matters. And so this how we walk with people with these tensions that are just a couple layers under the surface. We need to begin to confront both of these by paying attention to their story. Because one, their story does matter, the scriptures tell us. But two, it sure isn't all that matters, and as long as it does, life is not going to make sense. And so helping people make sense, that's one window into a tension that we recognize along the way.
And Rob, the third point that we want to suggest from our looking at this whole question of a narrative approach is that a life story framework serves to foster objective choice for adult learners. So another way to say that is we aren't simply watching our lives from the sideline and having it pass before us, that we have a say in the matter, and we can be a significant voice for the trajectory of what happens from here in our story. So one of the processes that we use in our process is a simple timeline process where, as you invite folks to identify significant chapters of their life story, it still might have a significant grip on them as they look at each of those individual post-it note experiences, so to speak. But it's when you invite them to step back and look at the whole of their life story, even by the use of a timeline on a poster board, it can have an amazing way of lessening the grip on their life from certain parts of their life story. And it objectifies their life story. Well, what's the so what of that? Is it gives them choice. They can see that they can have a hand in where we go from here. So Daniel Taylor offers this great quote to us. We are co-authors as well as characters. Few things are as encouraging as a realization that things can be different and that we have a role in making them so. This is possible only if we are real characters, not passive victims or observers. Seeing ourselves as active characters in new and healthy stories carries the power to transform lives.
So, in summary, real quick, the life story approach invites a learning process. It has a way of fostering connectivity in our lives, and it also has a way of fostering objective choice, just as we step back, if we invite people into this. The application then, where we went or the integration of this into your own settings, is how then do we pay attention to the life stories or adults of others? So the first, just initial observation before we get into kind of three applications is for us that have some sort of leadership in our church communities, one of the things we have to recognize that leaders, we are too often in a hurry to take people somewhere. We envision where they're going, what could become of them. And sometimes, as leaders, I mean, that's what gives us strength and direction to what we're doing. But we can too often be in a hurry to take people somewhere before finding out where they really are. And so that we're wanting to encourage, even in this life story approach, the importance of finding out where people really are in their journey. In essence, I think it's kind of time that one of the questions that kind of comes to the surface of our leadership cultures in our churches, in our congregations, is God's question to Adam in Genesis 3. His first question in the garden is, where are you? So an awful lot of all our wishes to take people somewhere, if we don't begin where they are, there's going to be a tendency to retreat. They're going to be retreating from us, from some of those challenges to go further. So,
and the way, Rob, that we're really suggesting people give consideration to that question, where are you, is simply to have them journey with others. How are we walking alongside others? And in our walking, how are we providing listening and questions and hope along the way? So we want to take just a few minutes to unpack each of these. So by listening, we must begin with the learner. Their experience matters. If we have learned anything from the literature and our own experience with working with adult learners, we need to begin where they are. So how do we listen with the first step of noticing them? How are we noticing the people in our local communities? And do we ask them what they already know about the subject at hand that we might want to invite them into? And how do we honor their experience, that they may be more expert on their life than we are, even though we want to invite them into some good learning? And listening, for those of us who our day in and day out work is somehow connected to the work of leadership. Listening can sometimes be counterintuitive to what we think we need to be about with people. So it begins with listening.
Which is obviously tied, the presence of listening is tied to the genuine care of asking questions. I mean, one of the ways you recognize that when people care for us and they're thinking of us is there's this emphasis on asking good questions of us. And so the question asking, and this could, as with listening, could be a longer conversation, but a couple things to point out: the importance of timing for our development. That it is possible at times we're asking very good questions, but perhaps at the wrong time. We'll often walk with people in a similar group, in an emerging journey group, for example, in which the timing of perhaps a new believer is the question that is really pressing for them is, how is it that God has entered into your story? Where do you notice that? How has he entered into our story? And that's a wonderful question. The question that, to go further with people, that some people get stuck in that question, but the question down the road is not only how has God entered into our story, but how have we entered into God's story? And so for some people in the exact same group, their development may be indicating just recognizing God in their story is exactly where they are timing-wise, developmentally. But down the road, there may be others in the group that it's now time to recognize that you've been inviting it into God's story. And so, I mean, that's just one example of the ways in which we have to pay attention to the developmental needs by the sorts of questions we're asking. Overarching point is, and there's a gentleman that mentioned this to me 6 months ago, and it stuck with me. He's in his 80s. He's coming back from a dinner party with his wife, and they said after the dinner party it happened again. And what they meant by that, as he recounted this experience to me, is just the pain of them being the only ones that are asking questions of people. And what he said to me was, no one drawing them out. And what he said to me, he goes, so many people are trying to be interesting. And what we realize really helps us in our development is not people being interesting, but people being interested. And with this whole notion of asking questions, the second sort of application point, this whole invitation to be interested in others, questions that invite exploration. Let's move on to the third.
The third way we want to recommend is by providing hope. So if we provide listening, if we honor people by asking timely questions, we will provide hope for them. But that hope needs to come from a bit of an informed place. So one of the ways that we do so in our process is to invite or to ask questions that come out of a place of learning from those who have come before us and those who have moved on towards finishing well. So if we can learn from those who come before us, we can begin to ask questions more particularly as we listen to people, and it's a way that we can offer hope that is not just coming out of just blank listening or questions that are coming out of nowhere, but it really comes out of a concern with how are they moving toward maturity, how are they moving toward growing up. And Rob, that really leads into the whole notion of language.
Yeah, certainly a significant element of people when they're at a place of either crossroads or disorientation or stuckness is the whole role of providing language, way to talk about where they are. I mean, after all, this is what the Psalms have been doing for centuries on end, is giving us language to name things. Now, it's not the only move that has to happen as we walk with people in their life stories, but until people get a language to talk about where they are, a language about where they're heading, what's happened. So the importance of naming things as we listen, as we ask questions, to them from time to time to point out, yeah, it sounds to me like this is what's going on for you. So the importance of language, it's kind of strewn through this whole life story approach.
And the third part of providing hope is for us ourselves, we ourselves to be hopeful people, or how do we be a hopeful person? And something that's fundamental to the formation of others is that we need to become noticers of others. And fundamental to being a noticer of others is walking alongside them or being a guide for others. So the whole notion of walking alongside those whom we desire to see life change happen for begs of us that we become hopeful people in walking alongside them.
A significant mentor of mine has been Dr. James Houston up at Regent College in Vancouver, BC. And he will often be asked, if you've ever been around him, one of the things that becomes amazing is that you're with him for 20 minutes and he begins to be able to name some things and identify where you're at, particularize you would be the word. And people also say, how in the world, after 20 minutes, can you possibly really spot on know where I'm at in such a clear way? And his response often to folks that ask that question is, he goes, well, the Lord sends a thief to find a thief. And his notion is get to know the thievery of your own heart. And then when you walk with others, you'll have both the grace and the insight to walk in their lives as well, to identify the thievery of their own heart in a gracious way. And so there's no substitute. This is not a technique we're talking about here. I mean, our own lives have to be the substance of becoming, growing up, in order to walk with people this way.
Well, what we want to do now, Rob and I have been rambling for a little bit here, Rob more than me. We want to take some time to invite you to toss some questions our way. And we see a few of them that have come in. And while we're looking at or giving you a few moments to fill out those questions and send them our way, we also want to invite you to consider some next steps from this conversation.
Yeah, as we're waiting for the questions, we'll be sending you later today in the afternoon a follow-up email just for thanks for joining us. But in that email, we'll include a link that can take you to a page where we put a couple things. One of the things that we're offering you is we've been working on a book, and one of the chapters is a storied way about the role of adult story in the development of adult believers. And so the chapter is a further elaboration, goes into much greater depth than what we've been able to do here in this 25 minutes to a half an hour. So we would love for you can download that right from the website to get a sense of how that may be integrated into some of the things you are already doing in developing other people. Secondly, we're hoping to host here over the next month or so a number of online meetings for people where we can actually talk back and forth about the emerging journey process, kind of our featured process where we integrate this life story approach into an 8-month process of walking with people. I'll share with you how you can take a meaningful walk in the company of like-minded believers guided by 3 questions. Who is God? Who am I? And what does God desire to do through me? And so if that's something you're interested in, both in the survey after the webinar is over as well as on the link from the follow-up page, you'll be able to kind of let us know, I am interested. I'd love to join you for the meeting, one where we can have a little more back and forth than this format. Currently, we're limited to if you have any questions, to be asking them via the chat or questions page on your GoToWebinar panel. So,
Rob, one of the questions is what's the connection between this narrative approach and leadership development? That it seems as though one of the things that we've noticed is there has again been a lack of attention given to our followership, but a whole lot of airtime given to the whole work of leadership. And in the past 25 years, that's been the case. And certainly with things like the reveal document coming out, it seems as though something has gotten lost along the way. So what we're not suggesting is that we need to bail out on having regular classes where we provide information for people or preaching good sermons or those sorts of means. But there seems to be something in terms of a life transformative power that comes from inviting people to connect truth with life. And so one of the things that we've noticed as people are learning, how do I do this work of leadership? And one of the things that we want to invite them into is, how are you doing with your followership? And let's invite you to look at your life story in various ways that can invite that sort of learning. And lo and behold, they begin to make the connections with how that's connected to the work of leadership and how they lead, how they respond, and so on. Another question we have, Rob, if you can show that. How many people can you do the emerging journey with well?
You know, typically this 8-month process of the emerging journey is a group of anywhere from 5 people to 12 people. And it fits under typical small group kind of details in which they'd be able to walk in a group of, 7, 8 with a trained facilitator to kind of lead them through the journey. Someone that's been kind of a hair ahead of them in understanding how the journey works. But it integrates all these sort of elements of a life story process as well as, it's an exercise in paying attention to the good thing God's up to. And so typically they're anywhere from 5 to 10 would be the size of the groups.
There are some churches where they have multiple groups going. So in churches that would be over 500 or 2,000 and that sort of situation, then they would have 3 to 5 people be trained as facilitators. Each of those people lead groups of the numbers that Rob is talking about. And then they may do some things where they come together for certain kinds of learning as one larger group. But by and large, it does follow a small group process.
We also have a question about, just a technical question, will we have the PowerPoint available later? Yeah, we will be posting that PowerPoint to the that website page, so that will also be available later. We're also recording this, so for folks that are interested and they wish someone else had a chance to hear it, they obviously can't ask questions in real time, and we're still open to some of your questions. But they can listen in on the conversation that we already had.
We want to honor your time, and you've been gracious to stick with us this long, and we certainly appreciate that. As you come to know who Rob and I are, you would come to know that this has been a great format for us to use and to kind of bring people together. But we love meeting in person and having a good cup of coffee together. So if you're ever in the Sioux Falls area, by all means, we'd love to visit with you. We hope to hear from you, those of you who aren't involved in the emerging journey process, to see how we can get you going in that direction. So, Lord bless and keep you, and we hope to be in touch down the road.